Hello YouTube, take a seat, have a cup of tea. I've got Cherryade back in the horn. Need that. And welcome back to the Baron. Now, if you've been following my Twitter stream over at Baron Von Balls, you'll know I've not been doing videos for a while, purely because almost the day after I'd finished recording my last video for the 12 Days of Armsmas, I came down with the flu. And like always, I can't get a normal illness, so I wound up getting the Australian flu that seems to have hit England quite hard this year. And yeah, so it's only been the last couple of weeks that I've actually been able to get my voice back and talk again like what I does. So, I thought it's time to get back to videos, and I thought I'd do one that has been asked a couple of times on my Twitter feed about my interest in cheesecake and beefcake. Now, we're not talking about the tasty, delicious dessert cheesecake, which is very nice, or some kind of meat-based patty that you might have on a burger beefcake. No, we're talking about sexy and attractive men and women in provocative poses and different clothing. And that is what we'll be talking about in notes and things. So, the obvious one is, why do I use cheesecake and beefcake in my videos? Well, for the typical naysayer, it would be for clickbait, because boobs attract men, and pecs attract women, and pecs also attract men, and boobs also attract women. It's all about what you're into, and that's fine by me, because who doesn't like a nice bit of cheesecake and beefcake in the morning? When the actual reason is quite simple. It keeps your attention. Doing my talks at conventions and events and talking about writing, as I tend to, I very quickly found that me talking for half an hour doesn't keep people's interest for very long. Of course it wouldn't. It's me talking for half an hour about subjects people might be interested in at the start, but not completely. And I decided to have a bit of fun one year, because I wasn't sure how I was going to be doing, and I wasn't sure where I was going in my career as a writer. And I decided, you know what, it'll be fun to throw in some rather risque pictures of characters I was talking about and themes I was talking about. And that, well, basically got the ball rolling. More people came into my talks when I started doing that. And I didn't want to just use images of women in scantily clad outfits posing over chests and things like they did in 1950s and 60s for the pin-up art. No, I decided I want to be a bit more fair and use beefcake. I wanted to use attractive men in little clothing with rippling muscles, because, hey, I'm all about fairness and equality, and it got more people to my talks, so, hey, I'm a sellout. No, the other reason I quite like that, I quite like that era of artwork. It was a time when people could try different things that hadn't been tried before that. And to be honest, I fell in love with pin-up art quite a bit. I found it very interesting. I found the culture behind it very interesting. I found how they were used interesting, because there was a whole thing during World War I and World War II where pin-up cards were being made and printed and then sent out to soldiers in the field. And initially the whole idea was, hey, look at what you're fighting for, lads, look at these girls waiting for you to get home. But then eventually they became a bit of a collector's item, and they got a bit of feel to them that had never been had before. People started collecting them and trading them and swapping them. They wanted the whole set from this line of tobacco. And just, it's interesting when you actually look into where it all came from. So I thought I'd do a bit on that as well, because I was shocked when I actually looked up where the terms come from. Because of course, cheesecake and beefcake are the nice terms. They're not exactly offensive, they're not demeaning particularly. I mean, it's not like calling a woman a tart, or glamour pictures and things like that, which have the connotation behind them of being very racy and risque and women of loose morals. I found that term so much when looking up cheesecake, and that really bothered me. I don't like that. And in terms of beefcake, it's a bit more... It's a bit nicer, it's a bit funnier, it's got the connotation alongside cheesecake, where they kind of go together, instead of the terms they used before that, like hunk and stud, and stud muffin was one that came up a lot. That was used to describe a more feminine-looking man with the beefcake attributes, the big rippling muscles. So, I looked up where the terms officially came from, when did they start being used, and officially they started being used in the 1900s. Beefcake being the far more modern term, being used in 1949 as a shorthand for the male eye candy on a set in a film. It was used by videographers and photographers to say, okay, zoom in on the beefcake, rather than zoom in on this actor 2746, or whatever. And cheesecake really came into prevalence in the 1920s, when that sort of art style started to take off, and basically a photographer was taking a picture of a woman, and the wind blew her skirt up and showed off a bit more leg than it normally would. The very atypical Marilyn Monroe pin-up picture you tend to find quite a lot. And he was reported to say, wow, that was nicer than cheesecake. And that's where that term really hit prevalence. But actually before that, cheesecake was used to refer to rather attractive women. In the poem, it actually comes from a poem from 1662, after Cromwell drove women out of towns after the revolution in England. And while driving out some of these women, he did drive out the prostitutes and the women of ill repute. Again, that term comes up a lot, and I just really don't like it. It's a horrible phrase. But alongside them, he also sent women who maybe they had their bodices a bit more open, or had their skirt leg a bit higher, or perhaps just walked in a certain way. And that was what was referred to as cheesecake in this poem. And I'll read it to you now. It was done after Cromwell's death, so he never saw it. I'm pretty sure he would have found the guy and killed him if he had. He was like that. But the poem goes, "But it goes against our hearts to lose our cheesecake and our tarts." Now obviously tarts is a very old English term referring to women of ill repute, of provocative nature, of, to be honest, a woman who behaves like a man. And, again, it's a horrible term, it's not a nice term, but cheesecake appears to have always been in English parley, at least, to refer to a rather attractive young woman who may be a little bit provocative, but is still nice. Like cheesecake. There we go. So, that's my reason on why I like cheesecake and beefcake. It's not as offensive as some of the terms out there, it's a bit of a... It's just a nice term in my mind. It puts in quite nice images. And there's a lot of male and female representation as well, so it's not just, look at these attractive women in very little clothing. It is also, look at these rather attractive men in little clothing. And look at these women in a lot of clothing, but still looks good. And look at these men in a lot of clothing that still looks good. Because the problem is, when you look at other types of artwork along this, like pin-up and ecchi and similar, they have a very strong emphasis on very little clothing, very provocative poses, and very overt themes. But when you look at Cheesecake and Beefcake, a lot of it can also be very well-dressed people, dressed up very nicely, like men in suits, women in long dresses. These are still Cheesecake and Beefcake. And it's not about the pose. There's a much more of an air of class and sophistication about it. And as a follower and actual friend of mine posted when I said I was going to do a cheesecake and beefcake video. He pointed out that really when you're choosing between cheesecake and beefcake, what you're doing is choosing between Dieter Von Teese and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. So, thank you very much. I'll get my videos out more regularly. Please like and subscribe for future videos. Follow the links in the outro and the description below. And I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you very much. Now get out of my house. Bye.